The morning began like any other. The sun rose slowly over quiet streets. School buses followed their usual routes. Parents hurried their children out the door. Backpacks were zipped. Shoes were tied. Lunch was packed in a rush. It was an ordinary school day. The kind of day that never makes the news. The kind of day people forget by dinner time. No one woke up thinking something terrible would happen. No one felt danger in the air. No one sensed that this day would become a mystery that would last for years. Inside the neighborhood, everything looked normal. Neighbors waved. Cars lined up at drop-off zones. Teachers unlocked classroom doors. Students laughed in the hallways. Nothing about that morning felt wrong. And that's what made it so disturbing. Because sometimes the most terrifying events begin on the quietest days. The boy woke up early. He followed his routine. He brushed his teeth. He pulled on his school clothes. He grabbed his backpack from the corner of his room. To everyone around him, he looked like any other student. Just another kid heading to school. Just another face in a crowd of hundreds. No one noticed anything unusual. No one saw fear on his face. No one saw warning signs. No one thought to ask if he was okay. If someone had looked closer, maybe they would have noticed something small. A quiet mood, a distracted look, a pause before stepping out the door. But no one did, because on the surface, everything looked fine. At home, his family said goodbye like they always did. A quick hug, a reminder to be safe, a promise to see each other later. No dramatic farewell, no emotional goodbye, no feeling that it would be the last time. He walked out the door, alive, breathing, thinking about school, thinking about homework, thinking about whatever 14-year-old boys think about on an ordinary morning. He had no idea that these would be some of the last normal moments of his life. The school building stood exactly where it always had. Brick walls, wide doors, rows of windows. A place designed to feel safe. A place parents trusted. A place students believed protected them. To the outside world, it was just a school. To the people inside, it was routine, schedules, bell times, class periods, attendance sheets. Everything ran on time. Security cameras recorded students walking in. Teachers took roll calls. Hallways filled with noise, laughter, footsteps, lockers slamming, voices echoing off the walls. Hundreds of students entered that building that morning. Hundreds of students would leave that afternoon, all except one. He walked through the front doors like everyone else. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. No one followed him. On camera, he looked calm, just another student blending into the crowd. If you watched that footage today, you would never guess what was about to happen, because nothing in that video looked suspicious. No struggle, no chase, no confrontation. Just a boy walking into school, alive. At the time, no one noticed him for more than a second. He was not famous. He was not a troublemaker. He was not someone teachers kept their eyes on. He was invisible in the way most students are, and that invisibility would become part of the mystery. Classrooms filled. Teachers started lessons. Names were called. Hands were raised. Notes were taken. Life went on. Some students noticed him sitting in his seat. Some didn't. Some said later that he looked tired. Some said he seemed normal. No one said he looked scared. No one said he acted strange. If you asked anyone that day, they would tell you it was just another school day. That's what makes what happened next so difficult to understand. Because somewhere between the first period and the final bell, he vanished, not in a dramatic way, not in front of witnesses, not with alarms or shouting. He didn't run out screaming. He didn't get into a public fight. He didn't cause a scene. There was no moment where everyone turned their heads. There was no moment where teachers rushed into the hallway. There was no moment where the school locked down. Instead, he disappeared quietly. So quietly that no one noticed at first. An empty seat. A name not called again. A backpack still in the building. Small things. Easy to overlook. At first, teachers assumed he went to bathroom, or the nurse's office, or the counselor. No one panicked. Why would they? Students leave class all the time. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Still no sign of him. But the day continued. Classes changed. Hallways filled again. Students moved from room to room. And somewhere inside that massive building, one student was no longer where he was supposed to be. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Because once the final bell rang, once students poured out of the building, once parents waited in their cars, one boy never showed up. His family waited. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes passed. 20. Phone calls went unanswered. That's when worry turned into fear, and fear turned into panic. The school office searched records. Teachers checked classrooms. Staff walked the halls. No one could find him. And that's when the impossible question was asked. How does a student enter a school and never come out? The building was still there. The doors were still open. The hallways were still full of people. Yet one student had vanished inside it. No exit recorded. No camera footage of him leaving. No witness who saw him walk out. It was as if he had been swallowed by the school itself. At first, people thought it was a mistake. Maybe he left early. Maybe he skipped class. Maybe he went somewhere else. But as hours passed, that hope disappeared. Police were called. What started as a normal school day turned into a missing person case. And as investigators began asking questions, they discovered something even more disturbing. Certain areas of the school had no clear camera coverage. Some hallways were restricted. Some doors were rarely used. Some rooms were never shown on school maps. Places students weren't supposed to go. Places most parents didn't even know existed. As the search continued, whispers started. Students talked quietly. Teachers avoided certain questions. Administrators gave careful answers. It was as if everyone was afraid to say too much. Because deep inside the school, there were places where things could happen without witnesses, without cameras, without records. And over time, a darker idea began to form. What if he didn't leave? What if something happened to him inside those walls? What if the truth was being hidden? As days turned into weeks, as weeks turned into months, the answers never came. Nobody, no confession, no clear explanation, only silence, a silence that felt heavy, a silence that felt intentional, a silence that made people uncomfortable. And years later, when people tried to look back, when former students tried to remember, when investigators reopened old files, they all came to the same conclusion. There were gaps in the story, missing footage, missing records, missing memories, as if parts of that day had been erased, not by accident, but on purpose. To this day, no official explanation has ever been given that fully explains what happened. No clear timeline, no confirmed location, no final answer, only a haunting fact. He walked into that school alive, and whatever happened next, he never walked out. What really happened inside that school has never been officially explained. Before the headlines, before the rumors, before the whispers that would haunt this town for years. He was just a normal boy, not a name people recognized, not someone who thought he would ever be part of a mystery, not someone anyone expected would vanish. To the world, he was just another student, but to his family, he was everything. He was known as quiet but observant, the kind of boy who noticed things others didn't, the kind who listened more than he spoke. Teachers described him as polite. Classmates said he was friendly but reserved. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the most popular, but he had a way of making people feel seen. He loved drawing, not professional art, just sketches in the corners of notebooks, faces, buildings, strange hallways, locked doors. Sometimes he drew places he said he dreamed about. No one thought much of it. At home, he was different, more open, more relaxed. He joked with his younger siblings, helped his mother with small chores, carried groceries without being asked, hold doors open for neighbors. His mother often said he was too kind for his own good. He had plans, big ones, at least in his own quiet way. He talked about leaving town one day, going somewhere bigger, somewhere no one knew him, not because he hated home, but because he wanted more. More opportunities, more freedom, more answers. But there were things he didn't talk about. He had started coming home quieter than usual, sometimes lost in thought, sometimes staring at nothing. His mother noticed. She asked him if something was wrong. He always said the same thing. I'm fine. But a mother knows. She noticed the way he avoided certain questions, the way he rushed through homework, the way he stayed up later than before. Sometimes she would find him sitting on his bed, just staring at the wall. When she asked what he was thinking about, he would smile and say, nothing important. But something was bothering him. Friends later said he had mentioned feeling uncomfortable at school. Not unsafe, just uneasy, like something wasn't right. He once told a classmate, there are parts of that building nobody talks about. When asked what he meant, he changed the subject. Another student remembered him asking strange questions. Why is that hallway always locked? Why do some teachers avoid that wing? Why does everyone pretend nothing is there? Most people laughed it off. Old buildings have locked areas, storage rooms, maintenance halls. Nothing unusual. At least, that's what everyone told themselves. At home, his mother noticed something else. He had started checking his phone more often, looking over his shoulder when texting, deleting messages quickly. When asked who he was talking to, he said, just friends. But she noticed his hands shaking sometimes, just slightly. Then came the last normal morning, the morning that would later be replayed in his mother's mind 1,000 times. The sun came up like it always did, birds outside the window, the smell of breakfast in the kitchen. Nothing felt different. She called him for breakfast. He came down wearing his usual hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder. Hair is still messy from sleep. He looked tired. She asked if he slept well. He hesitated, then said, yeah, just had weird dreams. She asked what kind. He smiled. Just school stuff. They sat at the table. She reminded him to eat. He pushed food around more than usual. She told him not to be late. He promised he wouldn't. Before leaving, he stopped at the door, just for a second, like he wanted to say something. His mother noticed. She asked, you okay? He nodded. Then I hugged her, longer than usual, tighter than usual. She laughed and said, you're going to make me late for work. He smiled, just wanted to. Those were the last words she would ever hear from him. I just wanted to. He picked up his backpack, checked his phone, opened the door. Sunlight hit his face. He turned back and waved. I'll see you later. She waved back. Love you. He said it too. Then he stepped outside and walked toward school. At the time, it felt like nothing. Just another school day. Just another goodbye. Just another morning. But later, every detail would feel heavy. The hug, the pause, the look on his face, the way he hesitated, the way he held on. That was the last time his family would ever see him. From the outside, the school looked ordinary. Brick walls, large windows, a flagpole out front. Students gather every morning. It looked like a place of learning, a place of safety, a place parents trusted with their children. But buildings, like people, can hide things, and the school had a history. It had been standing for decades, built long before modern safety codes, built when basements were common, built when tunnels, boiler rooms, and underground storage were normal. Over the years, new wings were added, old hallways were sealed, classrooms were closed. Some areas were simply forgotten, or so the school claimed. Students talk about the old wing, a section of the building that no longer appeared on updated maps, hallways with lights that barely worked, classrooms used for storage, doors that were always locked. If you asked teachers about it, they said, maintenance only, not safe, not for students. No further explanation. There were rumors. Every school has them, but these rumors lasted for years. Students said there was a basement level that wasn't on any official map. Others claimed there were old stairwells hidden behind janitor closets. Some said they heard noises at night during after-school activities. Footsteps, metal doors closing, voices echoing where no one was supposed to be. Most people laughed it off. Old buildings make noise. Pipes bang. Air systems hum. But some students refused to walk certain hallways alone. There have been small incidents. Nothing that ever made the news. A student who claimed he got lost and couldn't find his way back to class. Another who said a door locked behind her that had never locked before. A substitute teacher who reported being unable to open a room that was supposed to be empty. Each time, the explanation was simple: confusion, stress, mistakes. But the stories kept coming. Quietly, there were strict rules. Certain hallways were off-limits. Certain stairwells were locked. Certain doors had signs that read, "Authorized personnel only." No student ever saw what was behind them. The maintenance staff held the keys. Janitors, facility managers, a small group of administrators. They controlled access. They controlled who went where. And they didn't like questions. Students who asked too much were told, "Focus on your classes. That's none of your business. Stay where you're supposed to be." Some students swore there was more. They talked about a basement storage level that connected different parts of the school, a maze of old rooms, storage cages, boiler rooms, old lockers no one used anymore, places where self-service didn't work, places where cameras didn't reach, places no one could hear you if you called out. One former student later said, "There were parts of that school that felt wrong, like you weren't supposed to be there, like the building didn't want you there." The boy had noticed these things. He noticed which doors were always locked, which teachers avoided certain routes, which hallways emptied faster than others. He noticed patterns. And once you notice patterns, you start asking questions. In the weeks before he disappeared, he was seen near restricted areas, not breaking in, not trespassing, just watching, looking at doors, reading signs, standing still longer than normal. One student remembered him saying, "Does it ever bother you that there are places here no one talks about?" The student laughed. He didn't. Behind those walls, behind those locked doors, there were parts of school that very few people ever saw, parts that didn't exist on official floor plans, parts that had been sealed, reopened, and resealed over the years, parts that carried old smells, rust, dust, damp air, parts where sound didn't travel. Few students knew what really existed behind those locked doors. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The first period bell rang. Students filled classrooms. Teachers took attendance. His name was called. No answer. The teacher marked him absent. It wasn't unusual. Students were late sometimes. Students skipped sometimes. No one thought much of it. The second period came. His seat was still empty. Another teacher noticed. Maybe he was in the restroom. Maybe he went to the nurse. Maybe he was called to the office. Again, nothing unusual. By third period, people started asking questions. A friend leaned over and whispered, "Have you seen him today?" Another shook their head. Someone said, "I thought he was here this morning." Someone else said, "I saw him in the hallway." Stories didn't match. His backpack was found in a classroom, not in his locker, not with him, left behind. That was strange. He never went anywhere without it. A teacher picked it up and brought it to the office. Inside were his books, his notebook, his sketches, everything he needed for the day, except him. The office staff called his name over the intercom. Once, twice, 3 times. No response. They assumed a simple explanation. Maybe he went home sick. Maybe his parents picked him up. Maybe there was a mix-up. But there was no sign-out record. No parent call. No nurse visit. Fourth period came. Still no sign of him. That's when concern turned into confusion. Teachers began calling the office. "Do you have him?" "He's not in my class." "Did he leave early?" No one had answers. Security was asked to check the hallways, bathrooms, common areas, stairwells. Nothing. They checked the exits. No footage of him leaving. No record of him signing out. No witness who saw him walk out. The building was large. Too large to search quickly. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. The office called his mother. She answered, expecting a normal school call. She was told, "He's not in class. Do you know where he is?" Her heart dropped. "He left for school this morning." Silence on the line. That's when panic started. Administrators gathered. Security intensified the search. Teachers were told to keep students in class. Whispers spread. Rumors moved faster than facts. Some students said they saw him earlier. Some said they didn't. Some said they thought they heard his voice. Nothing could be confirmed. They searched again. Storage rooms, empty classrooms, maintenance closets. Still nothing. Time passed. Too much time. And then someone said the words no school ever wants to hear. He's missing. Not missing from the neighborhood. Not missing from home. Missing inside the school. That's when the school realized a student was missing inside the building. She arrived at the school like she did every morning, expecting to see her son walk out with friends, expecting a wave, a smile, a quick, "Hi, Mom." But the moment she stepped onto the campus, something felt off. The parking lot was busier than usual, yet there was no sign of him. Other parents were picking up children, hugging them, laughing, but he was nowhere to be seen. Her heart began to race. She called his name as she walked toward the school entrance. No response. Not a single familiar voice answered. She ran inside. Teachers were at their desks, marking papers, talking quietly. The office staff were busy. Phones rang constantly. She approached the front desk. "Have you seen my son?" she asked. Her voice trembled. The receptionist paused. A look of hesitation crossed her face. He's not in any class right now," she said carefully. "Maybe he went to the nurse?" She tried calling his cell phone. No answer. Again and again. Each unanswered ring made her stomach twist tighter. The staff began looking concerned. One of the teachers suggested checking the hallways. Another offered to call the nurse's office. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. She started pacing the office. Her hands were shaking, her chest tightening. She asked to see the principal. He arrived quickly, eyes serious. He explained the attendance records. He explained the security cameras. He explained that the boy had entered the school that morning, just like every other student. Everything was normal, except he was gone. Panic set in. She checked again. No messages. No classmates had seen him. No one had any clue where he might be. The office staff tried to reassure her, but the fear in her chest was growing too large to ignore. It wasn't just a worry anymore. It was fear. She could barely speak. Her mind raced through every possible explanation. Had he run away? Had he wandered off? Had someone taken him? Every thought was worse than the last. The principal finally made the call. Police were on their way. A mother who had started the day with normal expectations was now standing in disbelief. She could barely breathe. Every parent in the office turned to look. Every eye on her reflected concern, confusion, and fear. Her knees weakened. Tears came without warning. She sank into a chair, clutching her phone. This can't be real," she whispered. "I saw him this morning. He was fine." Minutes later, officers arrived. They asked questions. They took down names. They inspected classrooms. They spoke to teachers and staff. The investigation began immediately. But in those first frantic hours, there were more questions than answers. Where had he gone? Why was no one aware he had disappeared? How could a student enter a school and no one knew he was missing? A missing person report was officially filed. She was told to stay nearby. She was told to provide any details. She was told to be patient. But patience was impossible. Every passing minute felt like eternity. Every unanswered phone call felt heavier. The idea that something had happened inside the school, something beyond explanation, it began to creep into her mind. And as she sat there, shaking and crying, she realized a terrifying truth. No one could explain how he disappeared. No one could explain how a boy entered a school alive and vanished without leaving. The police arrived quickly, but even their presence couldn't ease the growing fear. Officers moved with purpose, but every step they took seemed to deepen the mystery. They began where any search would start. Classrooms. Each room was meticulously checked. Desks overturned. Lockers opened. Drawers emptied. Every corner is inspected. Every closet. Every cubby. But the boy was nowhere to be found. Next came the hallways. Officers walked slowly, scanning walls, peering under stairwells. They checked every doorway, every classroom, every storage area. Some of the hallways were familiar. Others were quieter, less traveled, parts of the building that students rarely walked through. And it was in those quiet hallways that tension began to rise. Bathrooms were next. Stalls opened. Sinks examined. Everything looked normal. Empty. No sign of struggle. No sign of anyone having been there recently. The search extended to the gym. Equipment racks. Locker rooms. Bleachers. All carefully inspected. The officers moved to the cafeteria. Tables checked. Trash cans emptied. Cooks and staff interviewed. The nurse's office was next. Every record examined. No visits logged. As the hours ticked by, theories began to form. Could he have run away? Maybe left through an exit no one noticed. Maybe I went home without telling anyone. The idea seemed impossible, but it had to be considered. But then contradictions began to appear. Staff statements didn't line up. Teachers remembered seeing him in different places. Some said he had left for the restroom. Others said he had never left his seat. Security logs showed no sign of him exiting the building. Cameras revealed gaps. Hallways with no footage. And then there were the restricted areas. Doors that students weren't allowed to open. Maintenance closets that staff claimed were off limits. Old stairwells hidden behind storage rooms. Everyone had an opinion. No one agreed. Officers began to focus on these areas. Every interview seemed to circle back to the same spots. Every teacher, every student, every staff member mentioned them. One hallway, in particular, kept coming up in every interview. A hallway that rarely appeared on maps. A hallway that was quiet. A hallway that students avoided. A hallway that seemed different. And as the investigation pressed on, it became clear this hallway was more than just a corridor. It was a thread woven through every witness statement, a thread that might hold the key to the mystery. The hallway didn't look like much at first. Just another stretch of worn tile, flickering fluorescent lights, paint peeling from the walls. But the air felt different there. Heavier, colder, quieter. The kind of quiet that felt wrong. It was located near the older wing of the building, far from the busy classrooms, far from student traffic. Most students didn't even know it existed. Those who did avoided it. At the end of the hallway were doors. Not classroom doors. Thick industrial doors. Painted over again and again. Each one marked with faded warnings. Authorized personnel only knows student access restricted area. Only a small group had keys. Maintenance workers. Facility supervisors. Select administrators. Teachers rarely went there. Students never should have. But witnesses said people went in. And sometimes they came out looking different. Students who stayed late for clubs or sports talked about it. They said they heard strange sounds. Metal scraping. Heavy doors closing. Low humming from deep inside the building. Sometimes voices. Muffled. Hard to understand. Sometimes shouting. But when they asked staff about it, they were told. Boiler room. Pipes. Old equipment. Always an explanation. Always a reason not to look deeper. One student claimed he once saw a door left open. Just for a second. He said he saw stairs going down. Not up, down, into darkness. He said the air that came out smelled old, damp, like a basement that hadn't been opened in years. Before he could look longer, a staff member slammed the door shut and told him to leave. Immediately, security footage showed staff entering the hallway. Sometimes late at night, sometimes during school hours. They would go in. The door would close. Minutes would pass. Sometimes long minutes. Then they would come out, alone. Officers asked why the hallway wasn't on updated floor plans. Administrators gave vague answers. Old layout. Outdated schematics. Maintenance areas not listed for safety. But the more they pushed, the more uncomfortable people became. Some staff members refused to talk about it at all. One janitor reportedly said, "I don't go down there unless I'm told." When asked why, he just shook his head. Whispers spread among students. They called it the dead hallway, not because anyone had died there officially, but because it felt like a place where sound went to disappear, a place where you could scream, and no one would hear you. Investigators realized something chilling. If a student somehow entered that hallway, there would be no cameras, no witnesses, no easy way out, just locked doors, stairs going down, and silence. Whatever was down there, students were never meant to see it. The basement was like stepping into another world. Cold air hit anyone who descended the narrow stairs. Darkness pressed against the walls. The smell of damp concrete and rust lingered in every corner. Even the lights flickered sporadically, as if struggling to illuminate what shouldn't be seen. The floor plan of the basement was confusing. Old rooms, sealed doors, narrow corridors that twisted unexpectedly. Some areas had clearly been renovated. Yet the renovations were incomplete. Walls patched but not painted. Doors replaced but left locked. The feeling was that no one had walked these halls regularly for decades. Investigators moved cautiously. They checked every room. Old furniture, broken lockers, abandoned equipment, metal cabinets filled with dust and rusted tools. Boxes stacked haphazardly, some falling over as they brushed against them. Everything had a sense of neglect and secrecy. Some areas were disturbed. Scuff marks on the concrete floor. Doors that had been forced closed. Scratches along walls that weren't consistent with normal wear. It was as though someone or something had been here recently. Clues were minimal but strange. A torn notebook page wedged under a floorboard. A faint footprint in the dust. Too small to belong to an adult. Old papers scattered, but missing logs where they should have been. Records of who had accessed the basement had vanished. The air carried odd smells. Something metallic. Something decayed. Something that reminded officers of bleach and damp soil at the same time. It was the kind of smell that set the teeth on edge. Some doors led to rooms no one had entered in years. Storage rooms filled with old furniture and boxes of files. Mechanical rooms that hummed faintly. Hallways that ended in walls. Walls that had clearly been patched over something hidden behind them. Every corner seemed to whisper secrets. Officers searched methodically. They measured, photographed, cataloged, but nothing to confirm what had happened. No bodies, no blood, no obvious crime scene. And yet, something had clearly occurred here. Something that someone wanted hidden. Investigators noted every oddity. Missing maintenance logs. Doors that should have locked automatically but didn't. Strange marks on floors and walls. Evidence of recent movement in areas supposedly abandoned. It was a puzzle with pieces missing. Every step deeper into the basement increased the tension. It was as though the building itself was holding its breath, as if it wanted to keep its secrets. And for those searching for answers, the deeper they went, the more questions arose. As investigators dug deeper, attention turned to a single staff member, someone who had access to every hallway, someone who could move through the school without raising suspicion, someone whose schedule aligned with the times the boy had last been seen. He had been at the school for years. Most students barely noticed him. Most staff didn't pay him much attention. But those who did remembered odd behavior. He was meticulous, but overly cautious. Polite, yet unnervingly observant. He watched more than he spoke. When police interviewed him, they noticed the first signs of nervousness. He avoided eye contact. His hands trembled slightly when handed forms. He gave answers, but too quickly. Sometimes he paused, as if calculating what he should say next. The timeline became a puzzle. He claimed to be in certain rooms at certain times. Other staff remembered seeing him elsewhere. Minutes didn't add up. Small details contradicted his statements. Repeated interviews produced inconsistencies. One day, he said he had never entered the basement. The next, he vaguely remembered checking a storage closet. Some explanations seemed rehearsed. Others were vague, almost careless. Rumors began circulating among staff and students. Some whispered he had been seen near the restricted hallway late at night. Others said he was unusually interested in who accessed certain rooms. Still others suggested he had been unusually insistent on locking doors quickly when students passed. None of it could be confirmed. Investigators tried to tie him to the disappearance. They reviewed footage. They checked logs. They interviewed witnesses. But every lead ran into dead ends. No fingerprints. No evidence of forced entry. No items linking him to any wrongdoing. And yet, something about him made officers uneasy. It wasn't just the inconsistencies. It was the aura of someone who knew more than he admitted. Someone who moved in the building like a shadow. Someone who seemed always present. Days turned into weeks. And the more the investigation focused on him, the less they could prove. Statements conflicted. Physical evidence was scarce. Alibis were thin but plausible. It was a frustrating pattern. Every suspicion raised, every lead followed, fell apart under scrutiny. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the school itself was a barrier. Administrators were cooperative at first, but their answers were cautious, measured, carefully worded. Lawyers appeared quickly, insisting on formalities. Questions had to go through layers of permission. Emails were slow to respond. Records that should have been immediate were suddenly missing or unavailable. Teachers and staff were told not to speak. Not to students. Not to parents. Not to investigators. Even longtime employees seemed wary. Conversations ended abruptly when certain topics arose. Whispers filled hallways. Eyes shifted. People avoided each other. Security footage was inconsistent. Some cameras were conveniently offline. Some angles were blocked. Some files had been overwritten. Investigators began noticing patterns. Gaps where records should have been complete. Doors marked restricted were suddenly secured with newer locks. Areas that once allowed occasional access were now completely off-limits. Whistleblowers who tried to speak were met with warnings. Not threats outright, but subtle messages. You don't want to get involved. Focus on your work. Better to stay quiet. Fear spread quickly. Even those who knew something felt powerless. Even those who could help stayed silent. Parents grew frustrated. They asked questions. They demanded answers. They were given reassurances. Statements about ongoing investigations and privacy filled letters and meetings. But as days turned into weeks, it became apparent. The more the parents pressed, the less information surfaced. Investigators were frustrated. They had leads. They had witnesses. They had strange anomalies. Yet the school's silence acted like a wall, a barrier thicker than concrete, a barrier that refused to give way. And slowly, a theory began to form. Perhaps it wasn't just a missing student. Perhaps it wasn't only an unexplained disappearance. Perhaps the institution itself wanted the case to disappear. The story didn't stay quiet for long. Local news picked it up. Headlines flashed across screens. Student vanishes inside school, no explanation. Parents demand answers after mysterious disappearance. Reporters lined the streets outside the school. Cameras rolled as parents spoke to the press. The community, once calm, now stirred with anger. Parents were frightened. Every morning, they watched their children board buses. Every hallway felt smaller. Every classroom seemed less safe. Questions swirled. Could this happen to their child? Could their school, the place they trusted most, hide something? Meetings were called. Protests began. Parents gathered, demanding answers. Voices echoed through gymnasiums and auditoriums. We want the truth. Why is no one explaining? How could this happen under your watch? The school's reputation took a hit. News stories circulated nationwide. Social media erupted with speculation. Parents shared theories in online groups. Some said it was negligence. Others whispered of darker secrets. Conspiracy theories began to take hold. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed students had always been warned about the restricted areas for a reason. Some said staff had intentionally withheld information. Others speculated about hidden tunnels, forgotten basements, and secrets too terrible to reveal. The family's anguish became a public story. Every statement, every tear, every interview added fuel to the fire. The boy's absence became more than a missing person case. It became a symbol of fear, a cautionary tale whispered in every household. Yet, amid the public uproar, the official investigation began to stall. Lawyers and administrators carefully limited what could be said. Security footage remained incomplete. The staff remained silent. Requests for updates grew longer to answer, and often went unanswered. As attention grew, the pressure on the school and investigators mounted. And then, slowly, subtly, the attention faded. News cycles moved on. Social media posts disappeared. Parents grew weary, and the public's outrage waned. Months passed. The investigation slowed. Officers who had been dedicated to the case were reassigned to other duties. Leads that had seemed promising were quietly ignored. Evidence collected in the early days, misplaced or forgotten. The mother refused to stop searching. Every morning, she hoped for news. Every night, she held on to the memory of her son. She called anyone who might have information. She visited friends of friends. She posted flyers. But the town began to move on. Life returned to the school. The hallways were filled with students again. Teachers resumed their lessons. Administrators reassured parents that everything was under control. It looked normal. It sounded normal. It smelled normal. But beneath the surface, the memory of that disappearance lingered. Whispers still existed. Students who had been there that day spoke quietly. The staff remembered the boy's face, the restricted hallway, the locked doors. Some felt guilt. Some felt fear. Some felt relief that no one had discovered the truth. For the mother, every day was the same. Empty lunches, empty rooms, empty hallways. She carried hope quietly, alone, a hope that someone, somewhere, would come forward. Investigators officially declared the case cold. No leads, no evidence, no suspect. The school returned to normal. Life went on. But the question remained, what had happened inside those walls? And then, long after the public moved on, a faint trace of truth remained. Someone out there still knew what happened. Someone who had seen. Someone who had heard. Someone who had kept a secret. Years passed. The case was cold. The school had returned to its daily routine. The town moved on. Life went on, except for those who remembered. Then, a former student came forward. Someone who had been in the school the day the boy disappeared. Someone who had witnessed things they had been too afraid to speak about. They had stayed silent for years. Fear of retaliation. Fear of being dismissed. Fear of the unknown. But now, the need to tell the truth outweighed the fear. The witness described details never shared before. The restricted hallway. The strange sounds. Arguments echoing behind locked doors. Doors closing suddenly, as if something or someone didn't want to be seen. The timing of the boy's disappearance suddenly made sense in a new way. The witness provided a timeline that contradicted previous accounts. Details that had been overlooked suddenly became critical. They described seeing staff moving unusually. Shadows where no one should have been. Moments of silence that felt deliberate. Every sound, every door closes, every hurried step now had meaning. The witness explained why they had stayed silent for so long. They had been scared. They had been young. They had worried no one would believe them. They had worried the school, the staff, or even the authorities would retaliate. Years of guilt weighed heavily. Finally, they spoke. But by the time they spoke, it was too late. The leads had gone cold. Memories had faded. People who could corroborate were gone. Evidence had been lost. Investigators returned to the school, hoping for a breakthrough. But almost immediately, they hit dead ends. Security footage was missing. Cameras that should have recorded every hallway that day, gone. Overwritten. Corrupted. Vanished without explanation. Records that could have provided answers were destroyed. Maintenance logs. Access records. Old schedules. Anything that might reveal who was where erased. Staff members who might have helped retired or moved away. Some refused to talk. Others claimed they didn't remember. Others simply disappeared from the story entirely. Even renovations complicated the search. Walls had been patched. Floors replaced. Rooms altered. Every change seemed to erase a clue, a trace, a hint of what had occurred. Legal limitations added another layer of frustration. Statutes of limitations, privacy laws, and missing documentation slowed any chance of reopening the case. Investigators could speculate. They could theorize. They could remember. But proving anything became impossible. Months turned into years. Every lead seemed to collapse into the same frustration. Every clue dissolved into uncertainty. Every hope of resolution faded. And as the years passed, it became clear. The truth was buried, both physically and legally. Years had passed. The boy never returned. The school moved on. The town forgot, or tried to, but the questions remain. Where could he be? Did he leave another way, unseen and unheard? Or did something happen inside the school? Something no one was meant to witness? Was there a cover-up? Records missing. Footage erased. Staff who wouldn't speak. The restricted areas remain locked. The doors remain closed. The secrets preserved. Why has no one confessed? Why do whispers continue, even decades later? Why do old hallways feel heavier when you walk past them? And the most chilling question of all, will the truth ever come out? Or is it buried forever in shadows and silence and fear? The boy entered the school alive, and he never came out. Ending thought for narration. Sometimes, the most terrifying mysteries aren't solved. They linger. They haunt. They wait for someone brave enough to uncover them. Years have passed. The mother never stopped hoping. Every holiday, every birthday, every morning, she whispered his name. She remembered his smile. She wondered what could have been. The school continues to operate. New students arrive each year, unaware of the story that lingers in its hallways. They laugh. They play. They live normal lives, ignorant of the shadows. But the restricted hallway remains closed, locked, silent, a reminder that some doors were never meant to open. The truth may still lie hidden somewhere inside the building. No one knows exactly what happened. No one knows where he went. No one knows what secrets remain buried in the walls, the floors, the old rooms. And silence. Silence has become the final enemy. It covers the answers. It hides the evidence. It protects the secrets. Final line for narration. He entered the school alive, and somewhere inside those walls, the truth may still be waiting.